All right.
All right. Okay, great. Thank you, Lola, for saying that. We are now being recorded, and this is, we record the classes so that way we can share them with other people, or if you missed one, you know, we recorded pretty much all of the last ones that are up on YouTube. So if you do have to miss the class, we should be able to send you the video so you can make that up in a timely manner, or catch up on it later down the road. So again, if nobody has any questions for me right now, and they can wait until Thursday, or you come up with any major questions between now and Thursday, I'll be around to answer them. Two other quick notes about our CERT program. At some point, we're going to ask for a picture of everybody, whether you email it to us or you come meet me and we take a picture. And then we do a background check on everybody. And that's really, it's a pretty cursory background check, just to make sure that, and this is at the direction of the fire chief, that if we have volunteers of the city, and this is part of the city's good practice to do this, that we make sure that we have good members. But if you are concerned about your background, or you're concerned that you may not pass a background check, please still take the class. We may not have you as an active part of the CERT team going around knocking on doors, but the intent is to still have more people trained and more people informed. So if you have a concern about your background, that does not necessarily preclude you from being a CERT member, but we are going to do a background check and see what's up. Please, if you have a concern, you can also email me and we can have a conversation about that one-on-one to see where we stand. But please take the class, encourage others to take the class, and especially in the future. And I look forward to meeting you all in person someday when it's not COVID. Okay.
Greg, we may have one more thing here. Paul noted that we're seeing only the lower right 2/3 of the presenter's screen, the cover of the basic participant manual.
Okay, let's see. Let me pull up my phone and log into. I just want to make sure that we have the same view.
And if you want to see, someone else has asked, they said they cannot see who's talking. If you just scroll down on the roll of pictures, if you go put your cursor at the bottom, you'll see a little down arrow. You just click down until you find Gregory Walsh.
Yeah, so right now the screen, you should be able to see, if you can see the icons down here and the title up here, that is the screen that we're looking at. I did zoom in, so although it's not a full page here, I zoomed in so it's easier to read when you're looking at it through this. And I actually may make this a little bit bigger. That way, if you're all reading along or looking at pictures, hopefully you can see that. Terry will just be scrolling down through that, so hopefully that works for you. I am looking at it on my phone as well. Sorry, I'm not just like trying to ignore everybody. Just to make sure that we are looking at the right thing, and hopefully that works for everybody. Paul, does that make sense? Chat. Okay. So, and then again, as Lola said, on your actual image bar, let me see if I can. Video. Okay.
So I can see Lola when she talks, but I cannot see the presenter when he's talking.
Okay. So the best way to do this, and I'm going to point my phone at the screen so it's kind of a little inception thing. At the top of your screen, you should have this little block thing here. And if you click on the multiple blocks, you will be able to look at everybody's. So here's everybody's photos, as you can see on our screen.
Yeah, I can't see what you're doing at all. Like it's not there.
All right, hold on one second.
You'd have to do screen sharing in order for her to see what you're doing.
There you are.
Oh,
now I see you.
Okay. All right. So. All right. I'm going to try it this way real fast. Okay. Dang it. Hold on. Yeah, I'm gonna run far away for a second. All right. Sorry, ran across the room. So the way our computer system is set up right here right now, we don't have a good speaker system tagged in. So we actually had to dial in on another phone. So that
Oh,
is, you may not see the presenter unless you create the scroll bar at the top that allows you to see all of the speakers. Because we
Okay.
actually had to dial in for us to have we had a microphone, but we don't have sound. And if we have the microphone unmuted and not the sound, then it creates that weird echo loop that you just heard as I unmuted my phone. So you may not specifically see the person talking, but if you can see the screen, or if you can adjust, you should be able to adjust in one way to look at participants and be able to look at their icons if you want. And hopefully that helps. I'm sorry if you can't specifically see us, but hopefully that will help solve that problem.
Okay.
Okay, can everybody hear us again?
Yes.
Great. Okay, sorry you might not see us, our faces, right off the bat. But again, if you adjust your view, you should be able to actually look at, and you can even pin somebody to your speaker point. If you see the 3 dots next to somebody, next to their name, there's a little, you can click on that, and there's a little pin note. It just says PIN. And if you click on that, it will pin that person to really that speaker view. Does that all sound good for everybody? Hopefully that works. And
Yes.
All right, well, thank you all again for dialing in, and I hope you have a great class tonight, and I will see you all on Thursday. Thanks for the thumbs up, guys. Appreciate it. All right, Terry, raising your hand. Okay, thank you very much. Be safe, and I will see you Thursday. All right, how do you work? Okay, so usually how we start out this class is talking a little bit about what the CERT program is and why it exists. One of the events that really created the CERT program was an earthquake in Mexico City in 1985. Pretty good sized quake, and Mexico City sits on some rather unstable ground. Plus the city's very, very old, a lot of stone buildings. So there was quite a bit of damage. And it was a multinational response. One of the agencies that responded to Mexico City was the City of Los Angeles Fire Department. They showed up along with a lot of other people, and they were working very diligently to try and rescue as many people as they could. One of the things they noticed was that ordinary citizens who lived in Mexico City were working very hard, very diligently to try and rescue other people. And this stuck with them. They said, what a great force for good. The people who care are not just going to sit by and do nothing. They're going to step in. They're going to start working. These people, they call them emergent volunteers, and they rescued 800 people. They dug 800 people out of the rubble of Mexico City, which is a very, very good result, huge result. But it cost the lives of 100 of the rescuers. So for every 8 that they managed to pull out, 1 of them died. 1 of the rescuers died. So they decided that this was a great program if they could just harness it correctly. So the City of Los Angeles put their heads together and they came up with the CERT program whereby they could train civilians to be able to do the work that they're going to do anyway, but to be aware of what the dangers are, so they know when not to go in to some place that's unsafe. And these are some of the things that we're going to cover in the class. Later, and most notably after 9/11, the federal government with FEMA decided that this program that Los Angeles had is so good
that we need to make it national. And so they adopted the program, made it a national program, and it's now taught all across the United States. It's probably not in every city, and I'm not sure, it may not be in every single state, but it's in most of them. And most of your big cities have them as well, and a lot of the smaller ones. Around here, we have CERT teams in Turner. There's some people in Almsville. There's some people in Mount Angel, some people in Silverton, you know, a lot of the areas, Woodburn, a lot of the areas. Here in Salem, the CERT program is administered by the Salem Fire Department. Outside the city limits, a number of these smaller programs are administered by Marion County. It just depends upon who's willing to accept the responsibility for dealing with it. The program is the same. The manual that you were given the link to, this is a brand new manual that was just released in 2019. A lot of changes in it from the things that we used to teach. So we will probably cover along the way a couple of things that you may not see in the manual that we still consider to be very important. One of the things I noticed was they don't talk an awful lot about fire. And one of the other things they don't do when we get into the medical portion, they don't talk about doing triage on the victims. And we will add that in. We will talk about that in our class. So that's essentially the history of CERT, what it's about. We have some mottos. One of them is, in CERT, you always have somebody with you. And the phrase that we use for that is buddy, buddy, buddy. You always have your buddy with you when you're doing work in CERT. There's very few tasks that we consider to be safe enough that you would do by yourself. So you're always going to have somebody with you. The other one, the second one is safety, safety, safety. If you become injured, you're no longer able to help the recovery process. And so you really become part of the problem rather than part of the solution. So a big portion of this is to teach you how to know when not to put yourself at risk. That can sometimes be a tough call. We're not professional firefighters. We're not professional policemen. We're not expected to or required to put ourselves in harm's way in order to try and accomplish the task. We're there to assist the professionals and act, if necessary, in some areas autonomously. So we'll be getting into some of that as well. The last one, and I think is the most important motto they have for CERT, is the greatest good for the greatest number. You kind of have to keep that in mind sometimes and ask yourself, is what I'm doing the greatest good for one person or for a whole group? And it's important to remember that you're trying to do the most good for the most people. So that's pretty important. As you read through this book, you will see these things. They will be in the manual. And like I said, I'm not going to cover every single aspect that's printed in the book because it's just, it's pretty tedious when you do it that way. And you guys have the ability to read. So one of the things that I usually ask when we have a live class, everybody's here, is what's one of the greatest things about living in the Willamette Valley? Well, nothing bad ever happens here, right? You think about it, the most recent thing in history, perhaps prior to 2020, is the Mount St. Helens eruption in 1980. Okay? So that was 40 years ago. Prior to that, the biggest thing that happened in the valley was in 1962 when we had the Columbus Day storm. In both cases here in the Willamette Valley, the professional responders were able to handle the emergencies. And for the people that lived here, it was really just an inconvenience. I was 4 years old when the Columbus Day storm came through, but I remember it pretty well. And the power was off for a good couple of weeks in South Salem. That's kind of a nuisance. but it's hardly the end of the world. We had running water. It was this time of year, and it was, I don't remember it being particularly cold. Speaking of which, I saw that I was looking at the news today, or not, the weather report today, and starting Wednesday night, tomorrow night, I believe, it's going to start getting colder in the valley here at night, dropping down perhaps into the 30s. So a little something to be aware of, by the way. So, you know, I said, that's a great thing about living here. Nothing bad ever happens to us around here, right? What's one of the problems about living here in the valley is that nothing bad ever happens to us and nobody's ready, okay? So in previous classes, you know, that was kind of an esoteric point. And along comes 2020, okay? We've had a pandemic. We've had some pretty bad fires. We've had, at one point, we had here in the Willamette Valley, and in Salem in particular, and it kind of moved around. Other people got their turn also. But here in Salem, at one point, we had the worst air quality on the planet, worse than anywhere else, worse than countries that you might think, because they don't have any version of the EPA, and they just don't concern themselves with it. And their air quality is what we would call substandard pretty much all the time. We had them hands down. There were some towns that the air quality at times was really unbelievable. They have this scale that runs from 0 to about 500, and anything above 50 is considered to be less than ideal, and the higher up the scale you go, the worse it is. There were towns here in the valley that, depending upon where you were, they had numbers in excess of 1,100 on this 0 to 500 scale. It was awful, you know. If you remember the day after Labor Day here in Salem, when everything was red, the sky was red, everything that the light hit was red, that was nothing compared to the air quality that they were having. Now, we did hit somewhere above 700 here one day, I think. We had some pretty bad days. A lot of ash in the air. You could smell the smoke. It was pretty nasty. So usually the question I ask is, well, why do we prepare? Right? You know, nothing bad ever happens here in the valley. Why should we prepare? Well, this year it has answered that question for me. If you had supplies on hand, you know, you go to the store, and the pandemic, and not necessarily the fires so much, but the pandemic. You remember there for a while, it was almost impossible to find toilet paper on the shelves. If you had a good supply of it, you were sitting pretty well. But other things can fall, the same thing can happen, not just, you know, something like that. So the natural disasters that we might encounter, the normal ones, we might have flooding. That usually happens here in Salem every few years. Nothing like they get when the Missouri jumps its banks or anything, that kind of stuff. We have windstorms. Sometimes we have ice storms. Fire, although it didn't actually get into Salem, we certainly got the benefits of it. And then you could have a power outage for a variety of reasons. And of course, the pandemic, and it can cause shortages. In all of these cases, for the most part, our very talented emergency responders can handle these problems on our behalf, and they don't really need our help. They do this kind of stuff all the time. They train for it all the time. They're very good at it. But there's one natural disaster that here in Salem is what this class is about. Is what the reason we put this class on, and that is the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. So hopefully most of you have heard of it. If you remember, in 2011, there was a large earthquake in Japan, right off the coast of Japan. And one of probably the most famous things that happened from that was the failure of that nuclear reactor. that they had, okay? And Japan is probably one of the most earthquake resilient countries, if not the most resilient country on Earth. They understand earthquakes. They have them all the time, and they have pretty big ones. So the earthquake did not take out the reactor. All of their preparations for the earthquake were adequate, and the reactor survived. The problem was that the tsunami that was caused by that earthquake was high enough that it cleared the seawall that they had built. They had models and estimates that they felt were good enough to protect that reactor from a tsunami. Unfortunately, the tsunami produced a wave higher than their models showed could work. It's human error. They thought they had it covered. Unfortunately, they didn't. The water ran over the wall, got down in, took out the cooling system for the reactor, and that's what caused the problem. In our case, we don't have a reactor to worry about here. However, the subduction zone that sits off of our coast is exactly the same style, type, size of the one off the coast of Japan. So the earthquake that they had in 2011, when it happens here, not if, but when it happens here, will be the same type of damage. There will be a large tsunami. It will hit the coast. So to put some of that into perspective, I guess, is the word I want to use, is the earthquake can be anywhere from an 8.0 to a 9.5 at the absolute worst case scenario. It will last for between 4.5 and 5 minutes of continuous shaking. That is forever when you're in an earthquake. Most earthquakes last anywhere from 15 to 45 seconds on average, most of them. There's always exceptions to the rule, of course, but most of the time, that's a pretty good average. And the other difference is for anybody who's already been through an earthquake in their life, or more than one, is that most earthquakes that we encounter are what we call crustal fault earthquakes, such as you find in California, for example, or the spring break quake that we had here in '93, I think it was. Those are crustal fault quakes. The San Andreas Fault in California is a crustal fault. So that means that they're in the surface or fractures in the crust of the earth, and they do move. They shift and produce earthquakes, and they can produce quite devastating ones. The one in Northridge, California, in I think '91 or '92 or so in there, big quake, did a lot of damage. The one they had in 1989 in San Francisco, the Loma Prieta quake, also, 7 something, I don't remember specifically anymore. A lot of damage, collapsed the 880 freeway. Okay, did a lot of damage. Those earthquakes produce energy waves of a much higher frequency than the subduction zone quakes. And while you can get a lot of damage in general from a crustal fault quake, they don't have the ability to release anywhere near the amount of energy that you can find released from a subduction zone quake off the coast. The things that are likely going to be damaged are things that will resonate with very low and long frequency energy waves. And while here we don't really have much in the way of skyscrapers, we do have a lot of roads and a lot of bridges. And those are the things that are going to resonate and probably be damaged the most. So there's going to be quite a bit of disruption. And all of the common things that you're used to. I was born and raised in Salem, and I've had a pretty comfortable life. The reality is, I've always had what I needed provided by my parents when I was growing up, And then by myself, when I was old enough to have a job and have my own car, I could always go get what I need. I've been very used to being able to go to the store, buy my groceries or whatever it is I need. I can go to the wall, flip a light switch. I have lights in the house, turn the faucet, and I've got hot water or cold water as I choose. And I've got a thermostat on the wall, and I have heat in my house when it's too cold. All of that's going to go away in the earthquake. All of those things will be disrupted, and they'll be disrupted for quite a while. So the big question is, well, when's this going to happen? I wish I knew. I really do wish I knew, because then I'd be on vacation and away sometime when that happened. But we don't get to find that out. We know on average, from looking at geological records, when the last earthquake happened. We know specifically when it happened from another source, but on average, we know back about 10,000 years every time this has happened. Now, earthquakes don't follow calendars. They'll happen when they happen, but on average, it's about every 250 to maybe 350 years. The majority of the times that the Cascadia subduction zone has slipped has been on an average of 250 to 350 years. Okay? Most of them are a lot closer to the 250-year mark rather than the 350-year mark. And there are some ones that were out quite a ways, 1,000, 1,200 years apart or more. Those are far and away the exception rather than the rule, but it does happen. But we do know when the last one happened, almost to the hour when it took place, because the Japanese keep very, very good records, and they had on record a tsunami, which even in those days, the Japanese knew what caused the tsunami, and it was about 16 feet. So it was not enough to really cause a lot of devastation on their island, but they knew that those are caused by earthquakes. And so they started canvassing different towns, settlements, and what have you, to try and find out if anybody felt it. And no one did. They could find no one who said there was an earthquake on that day. But they knew it must have happened somewhere, so they simply marked it down that it was far enough away that no one felt it. And they dutifully wrote all that information down and put it in their files, and those files still exist today. So that earthquake happened on January the 26th in the year 1700. So this is 2020. So we are 320 years into a cycle that averages 250 to 350 years. Doesn't mean that it's going to happen today or tomorrow, but it could. It might be 50 years from now. It might be 100 years from now. We don't know. But there's the reason why the city of Salem wants to make this class available to anybody who wants to take it, and so that you can get prepared, okay? Because the better prepared you are now, the better you're going to be able to spring back from this. You're going to be able to survive it. It's a very survivable event. The biggest problem is the aftermath when you don't have running water, you don't have electricity, the grocery stores aren't open. And if they are, the shelves have been picked clean. You know, when we had, was it 2 years ago, we had that announcement that the water in our reservoir was tainted and you couldn't drink it. Anybody go to the grocery store and see if you could buy bottles of water, and there was nothing on the shelves? And then the same thing happened when everybody got the idea that, oh my God, there's going to be a terrible shortage of toilet paper because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And you go to the grocery stores and there was no toilet paper, okay? It's panic buying because the national average of people who are actually prepared for some sort of an emergency is about 8%. So that means 92% of Americans have the same plan. Once it happens, I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to go get what I need. There's not enough in the stores to supply 92% of Americans with what they need, right? So this is why you want to prepare. You will hear us talk about this quite a bit throughout the class. You want to store water, you want to store food. If you can afford it and you have a place to put it, small generator is a good idea, something powerful enough to run a microwave oven and large enough to power your refrigerator. If you have a freezer, now you're not going to power all of these things at the same time unless you buy a very, very large and expensive generator. But you can look at these appliances that you have and see which one takes the highest number of the most power. Where does it take the most power in order to run it? It might be the freezer, it might be the refrigerator, I don't know. But they all are marked. Sometimes they're most conveniently on the back side, so you have to pull it away from the wall. But it will tell you the wattage requirements. So you can buy a small generator that is capable of powering that unit, and it needs to have a little extra for a safety buffer. So you can plug in the freezer and run it until it shuts itself off because it's cold. And then you can move over and plug in the refrigerator and make sure it stays cold. And then if you need to heat something up, you can plug in the microwave and run it off of that. You're only running one item at a time, so you don't have to have a huge, expensive generator. But it might be something that you might want to think about for your home kit. So, like I said, you want to store 1 gallon of water per person per day, and that includes everybody who lives in your household, including if you have pets. If you have pets, you want to provide for them too. They're important family members, right? You want to make sure that you have enough food for everybody who lives in your household, and including your pets. If you are on prescription medications, I strongly recommend trying to get your pharmacy on the program of giving you the 90-day supply so that you always hopefully have some on hand. So things happen and the pharmacies aren't open and you still have some to get by. Eventually, pharmacy trailers will come in as part of the disaster relief, and they will, they will provide you with what you need, provided you can prove that you are entitled to that prescription. Now, most of these prescriptions are maintenance for something, might be blood pressure, cholesterol medication, heart medication, maybe thyroid, anything for diabetes, any of that kind of stuff. These are not medications that are typically abused by recreational drug users, so you're not going to get a huge argument out of them. What I do recommend you might consider doing is using your cell phone and take a picture of the bottle with its label, or if you actually have the prescription, the paperwork that the pharmacy gives you, it has the pertinent information on there. In a disaster, I really don't believe that FEMA is going to argue with you about, oh, this expired 2 months ago, and you say, well, I'm still taking it because I still need it for my blood pressure, and they're going to say, okay, and then they're going to provide you with some of it. If it's something that is considered a narcotic, then you're probably going to have a lot of different type of argument with them about whether they should fill it or not. I can't say, I'm not a pharmacist nor a physician, but if you have a photograph of the prescription that you can show to them and say, hey, look, this is what I need, and it's a valid prescription, much higher chance of getting what you need, because they don't know what the dosage is, what your doctor has prescribed. So that's all part of being prepared. It's kind of, which leads me into the next point, which is the survival really is a state of mind. It's a mindset that you put yourself in. So first of all, having some basic supplies, once the event happens, you're going to be able to sit back and comfortably say, well, gosh, I've already got that. I don't need to go fight my way through the crowds to try and get clean water or food or what have you. We have a calendar that's put out by Red Cross. Lola, do we have that? Do we have a link for that? We don't? I see you shaking your head.
No, as far as I know, we don't. I looked for that not long ago for something else and wasn't too successful, but I will try again.
Okay. I believe that you can probably find it by doing a Google search and just put Red Cross 24-week preparedness calendar. I think you can probably find it by doing it that way. I think it's a great tool. It shows you every week when you go to the grocery store what extra items to buy. And by the time you get to the end of it, you're roughly 6 months through the year and you've got your kit built. And then after that, now it's about maintaining it. So, you know, things expire. You want to keep an eye on that. But it's a great tool. The new book has, I believe, in here.
There's a checklist in the book.
Yes. Okay. So there's a checklist, and that's also a very good resource to use. I recommend looking that over, and along with the that Red Cross 24-week calendar, if you can find it. If not, we should be able to find a way to scan a copy of it and put it together as a link that you can get along with the videos of these classes. Personally, I think that the target amount of time that you want to prepare for is at least 3 weeks. Right now, the state of Oregon, city of Salem, and a lot of other agencies are saying, using the phrase 2 weeks ready, okay? Now, FEMA used to say a 72-hour kit, which is 3 days. And if, for example, you were living up the canyon and you had to be evacuated and you were able to grab a 72-hour kit and leave town and show up at the fairgrounds, for example, and you had 3 days worth of supplies for yourself, you're a lot better off than the folks who had to just show up empty-handed, right? You can stand on your own, and typically what that's going to do is make you feel a little bit better about yourself, in that knowing that you've got a certain level of security because you have your own water and your food, and you've got that, you know, you had that available. So there's nothing wrong with a 72-hour kit, but here in the earthquake scenario, my personal feeling is that you're going to be probably sheltering in place. You're going to be camping out in your backyard. So if you either do or have in the past gone camping, used to do that as a family, and you still have a lot of that gear, you're a long way towards having your home kit ready to go. And you want to make sure that you've got a supply of anything that you might consider to be important. And that usually, this is going to sound silly, but dry socks can really make a difference to your mindset. If it's cold and rainy and you've got some nice dry clothes you can put on, clean clothes, especially after a few weeks of that. There will be a national and an international response to this area once the earthquake hits, but it takes quite a bit of time to get that machine in motion and to get the things here. And we're not going to have the roads, the highways, and all of those things available to us to use to bring those things in or to get out. You're probably not going to be able to drive anywhere very far. Another thing to consider, along with the fact that you need, you know, this kit of supplies that you're going to keep in your house, is fuel, because gasoline and diesel fuel are going to become critical resources, and you're not going to be able to go and buy them at the gas station. Number one, they're not going to have electricity. If they do have generators to power the pumps, it's a critical resource, and it's all going to be allocated to the recovery effort, which means the police department, the fire department, and heavy equipment used to clear the roads and do all of that sort of stuff. So the amount of fuel that you have with you is all you're going to have. So what we usually tell people is the best idea is when your fuel tank gets down to about a half, that's when you go fill up again. So that you've always got at least a half tank of gas or diesel if that's what your vehicle runs on. If you do decide to buy a small generator and it runs on gasoline, you've got a fuel tank there in your vehicle, you can siphon that fuel out and use that to power your generator. But once you've consumed the food that's in the refrigerator and the freezer, then it's not going to matter anyway, unless you want to still run it on your microwave oven, that sort of thing. But it takes a while. One class, or even these 6 classes that we're going to do together, is not enough time to really put you into a survivor's mindset, but it's a good starting point. And we're going to throw an awful lot of skills at you, and hopefully you're going to be able to absorb some of this information. We know that the fact that, especially during this pandemic, there's really no way for us to get together and practice these skills. That's very unfortunate. So keep your book, review it once in a while. Be a really good idea. Yesterday, there was a 7.5 magnitude earthquake off the coast of Alaska. Some of you may have heard about that. The Earth is constantly shifting itself. It's still happening. It could be our turn the next time. We don't know. There's no way to predict them. So for that reason, is why Greg was thanking you very much for taking time out of your schedules to be here for this class for 6 nights. It's extremely important. To me, it's absolutely as important for you to build your kit and be prepared as it is to learn the skills to be a CERT team member, so that you can go out and start working in your neighborhood with your neighbors, the people next door, across the street, maybe a block or so down. Those are the people that you're going to be working on and helping. If you're at home, obviously that's your neighborhood. But if you are working, then your workplace is your neighborhood, and you can still utilize these skills. So it's not a bad idea to carry some of this gear along with you in your vehicle in case the earthquake happens while you're at work. There are some, as we talked about the videos that we have links for. One of them is called CERT in Action, and Lola will provide you with that link. At some point, we ask that you watch that video. It's maybe at the most 15 minutes long. And what it is, it's a dramatization showing a CERT team performing the various tasks that we're going to be teaching you. You watch it as many times as you like. In that particular demonstration, they're responding to a large windstorm. And they're relying on their cell phones, which here, that's something else is probably not going to work here. If you have a landline still, it's likely not going to function. If you have a cell phone, it's likely not going to function. One of the things we'll get into that's not in your book as much, but we rely on it quite a bit, is using amateur radio as a way to communicate, and also using low power two-way communications for the CERT teams are active in a neighborhood doing work, and it's how you can communicate with each other. So we'll talk about that. Let's see. So I talked about having food, water, medications. I didn't talk about much about building a first aid kit. Most first aid kits that you buy in a store, you got a bunch of Band-Aids. And there's certainly on a day-to-day basis, there's nothing wrong with having a bunch of Band-Aids. But in an earthquake scenario, the potential for a more severe injury is there. So I would also encourage you to have more first aid materials than just Band-Aids and a few pieces of gauze. There's splinting, there's dealing with an impalement in an eye, lots of bandages that are going to be far more absorbent than the average sort of thing that you'd have in a normal first aid kit. I would encourage you to look into those things. You can find first aid kits for sale on the internet all over the place. And while I'm not necessarily recommending you run out and buy one of those, they will all, at some place in there, they will list the contents. So take a look at that and see how much of that you have. And if you're going to start buying your home preparedness kit products, food and water, that sort of thing, think about adding in a few things at the at the section in the grocery store where they have these first aid supplies, or go to a pharmacy that has a much larger supply, and pick up some of these things and have them on hand. They keep for an awful long time, particularly if you pack them inside of a nice Ziploc bag and squeeze the air out of the package and Ziploc it closed. It'll keep those things nice for a very long time. And then we have a link that is coming. We don't quite have it up yet. It's one of the things Greg is going to take care of. But we filmed here, last month, I guess it was. Lola and I took our CERT kits and opened them up and dumped them on the tables here in the training facility. And we filmed going over what's in them. The CERT kit is a different kit than your home preparedness kit. If you're going to become a CERT team member, there's certain what they call personal protective equipment that we ask you to have, and that includes a hard hat, a CERT vest that's essentially the same color as this shirt that I'm wearing. For those of you who can see me, it's a Kelly green or a forest green color. It's a dark green. So the hard hat, which is an American National Standards Institute or ANSI rated hard hat. Now they're still plastic, but they're not to be confused with a bump hat. And we'll talk about those more in depth in that video. You'll be able to watch that at your leisure. The vest that identifies you as a CERT team member, that's its sole function, although some of them have zippers on the front, and then you can have pockets. The other ones are a bit more shapeless, and they have a Velcro closure, and they don't, if they do have pockets, they don't have any structure to the fabric. It's like, it would be like having a vest made out of satin. So it's a very soft, flexible material. If you put something in the pocket, it just drags that corner down, and they're not very good. But there's a whole variety of those things out there that you can buy. But the vest is there to identify you as a CERT team member, as is the hard hat, which is the same color green, and you can buy them, and they are labeled CERT on them. So the hard hat protects your head, but it also, again, identifies you as part of the team. You should have protective gloves, and that could be any type of glove. Like if you're working in a medical situation, you are probably going to want nitrile gloves. Maybe some sort of gardening glove that is somewhat protective, but still gives you a lot of dexterity and a lot of flexibility. And then you have, if you're going to be doing the heavy lifting, moving debris and that sort of stuff, then you might want a rawhide type glove that is more abrasion resistant and protects your hands. Those tend to be bulky and less, you have less dexterity. And so a different glove for a different job, depending upon what you're doing. And then safety goggles to protect your eyes. Oh, couldn't even read my own handwriting, sorry. And then the other thing is to remember to wear some sort of sensible shoes that protect no open toes. They protect your feet like a hiking shoe sort of thing. It gives good grip in the sole. They're comfortable, but they will protect your feet pretty well. So that would be a good thing to consider. For your home preparedness kit, the one thing I didn't talk about, and I should have, is adding a fire extinguisher. If you don't have a fire extinguisher in your home, you should. Strongly would recommend that. Certainly not a requirement for this class. I simply recommend it. They come in a couple of different sizes for home use. One of them is the skinnier 2.5 pound fire extinguisher. The other one is a larger 5 pound fire extinguisher. If for some reason you determine that having a 5 pound fire extinguisher is either A, too heavy, or B, too bulky for wherever you're going to keep it, and you decide to go with the 2.5 pound, I would then recommend that you get a pair of 2.5 pound fire extinguishers for every 5 pound fire extinguisher that you might buy. Just because the 2.5 pound has a lot less capacity and they will deplete themselves much quicker. And so consequently, if you are putting out a fire in your home, then having that second one could be a real boon to you. We also have a video that we will talk about more when we start getting into the fire section. And those videos have no audio, they're just a video. They put on by a fire department, and they show you living room fires under a couple of different scenarios. And where they spread much faster than other conditions. So it's a really good resource to look at so that you have an idea of how fast you can maybe try and tackle a problem, or it's too late, you need to get out and just let it burn because your life's in danger. So at this point, I've been doing this for an hour now, so we're gonna take a break. I would say no more than 10 minutes, and I'll be back. And then we will start going through the book, the stuff in the book, and make sure I haven't missed any points. I use the CERT manual more as an outline for me to make sure that I don't miss anything that's important. Typically, that's how I'm going to handle this. Is you read the book, I cover the points that I think are really worth talking about, and then if you have any questions, what seems to work best in this, pandemic edition of the class is if you will email Lola any questions that you have. If you think of something after tonight's class or after any other class, email her the questions. She will get those to me, and I will address those at the very beginning of the class. So, and it doesn't have to pertain to the chapter we're on. Anything that we're going to cover in the class is an open topic, and I'm happy to enjoy them or answer them for you. So with that, I'm going to stop talking for a little bit. I'll step away. I'll come back at about 10 after 7 and give everybody a chance for a break.
And I'm going to run my mouth for just a second. If you look at chapter 1, starting on about page 31, there are all the different lists for supplies for emergencies and for CERT kit type of supplies. There's just list after list after list for 5 pages.
So he mentioned the CERT vest, hard hats. Is there a certain location to purchase those at?
There are actually a number of locations, and we'll actually give you some more information about that. Go ahead.
Okay.
Great, Terry.
So, okay, and I might just talk about that briefly when I come back. So go ahead and take a break.
Lola.
Scott, were you saying something?
I just tried to put in that link and it didn't work for me for the Salem CERT kit. That was in the chat. But I'm doing it through the phone, so that could be probably a problem.
Oh, I'll send out the link for that after the class.
Okay.
Are you talking about the Red Cross one?
No, it said REDES
Oh, the
something.
Ready Supply. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think you can even just query Red Supply, just that word. That's the name of the company. You Google it, and I think you can find it that way too, if the other way isn't working. But there are lots and lots of different places where you can buy CERT supplies. There's some in town too. They may not have the CERT emblem on them. You might have to go someplace and just buy some of those emblems. That's not hard to do.
Scott, I just sent another link to
Oh,
supplies.
okay. I saw that.
Okay, so I'm back. We will cover everything that I had on my little note sheet, but a couple of things that popped up. One of them, I talked about this disaster preparedness calendar from the American Red Cross. I happen to have a copy of it right here. This is what it looks like. I'm reasonably certain that you can get this. You can find it online. I realize the resolution on the screen is not going to be all that great, but this will give you an idea what the calendar looks like so that you can, by week, buy certain items to start building your kit. It's a great outline so that you can get an idea of what goes in your kit, things you might want to consider having. If you get one of these, you can work it at your schedule. If you want to go and buy everything up in one shot, go right ahead. If you want to take more than 24 weeks to build a kit, by all means do that. Make this fit your budget. You're doing this to take care of yourself, and only you know what's really going to work well for you as to what pace you can buy these supplies. I know Lola was talking while I was away about where can you get the information about getting a kit. If you do a Google search on CERT kits, you will get a number of hits. A lot of places sell them. Take a look at them. Click on the kit that you're looking at. They usually have at least 3 different levels of contents, each one, of course, being more expensive than the previous one. Take a look and see what's in those kits, because you may find that you have a lot of things. The CERT kits typically will come in either a green backpack that is labeled CERT or in a duffel bag that is labeled CERT, okay? It's really unimportant to me if you get a CERT backpack or CERT duffel, or if you utilize some other container that you already have that's not green. It's important that the hard hat be green. It's important that the vest be green. But the backpack is not particularly going to identify you as a CERT team member. It can, but that's not its primary function. Its primary function is to act as a backpack. And if you already have a nice backpack that you want to use for that, save yourself the money and utilize what you have. If you feel that it's better to put it into one of those suitcases with the extendable handle and wheels on the bottom, and you got one of those, by all means, adapt that to your use. It's the contents that are far more important than the container itself. But if you do decide to buy a CERT kit online, try to take a look at the pictures because different companies offer different quality of products. We're talking about the CERT vest. So this is a CERT vest. This particular one, bring it up a little closer, it has a zipper on it. It has some pockets, places to put pens. It has flap side pockets down here. It is labeled that it is CERT on the front. It has these nice reflective stripes, which is a nice thing to have. And then on the back, if I can get this held up here, it says CERT in quite large, bold letters. These do come in different sizes, I believe. Yep, this one's a large. So they're a little nicer than the lesser expensive ones. These aren't that expensive, but they do cost more than the inexpensive one size fits almost nobody type of vest. So that would be something to concern yourself with. Another
about with vests is that you're likely to be wearing it over a jacket or a coat, so you don't want to get skinny mini vest, then you can't get anything on underneath it.
right. That is a good point, because if you end up wearing your jacket to keep yourself warm or dry over the vest's not really doing you any good. So it's certainly okay to make that vest a little bit bigger. Take that into consideration. Another thing that I intended to mention, and I got sidetracked, was there's a lot more information out there in the world, especially in this day of the internet, than just your CERT manual, okay? FEMA offers a publication. It's called Are You Ready? A Guide to Citizen Preparedness. It's available from FEMA. You can download this now. I got mine a long time ago, so this is a snail mail copy. I actually had them send it to me. This is free to you. It's your tax dollars at work. In this case, it's true. So you can go on to FEMA's website and find this Are You Ready? A Guide to Citizen Preparedness. And you can just download it to your computer. They might still send you a paper copy. I don't know if they still do that or not, but you can definitely get it from them for free. This particular item is something that I downloaded. This is the State of Oregon Office of Emergency Management Cascadia Playbook. Okay, this is available from the State of Oregon. You can download it off the internet at no cost. You save it on your computer and look at it that way. And I happen to have printed this copy, and it has, let's see how many pages this thing actually has in it. I see the staple has failed. If they actually have page numbers on here. There's got to be more than that. This is actually, the Cascadia Playbook is only a few pages long, but there's a lot of other information out there. The internet is a great source. You can search on phrases like emergency preparedness, disaster preparedness. You can get more specific. The Cascadia Playbook, you will be able to get that. There's something that's called the CREW, C-R-E-W, the CREW report, Cascadia Region Emergency Workbook, I think it is, and it's been updated a number of times, so you can get the latest information. It'll give you a lot of information about the earthquake specifically and what the state and the government, the federal government, is doing ahead of time to be prepared for when this happens, and also can give you a great deal of information about what to expect once the earthquake hits and what you need to do during it, and then what you should be doing afterwards. Lots and lots of information. Generic searches like emergency preparedness will show you a variety of sites. Some of them you may find to be a bit too out there on the fringe. And just pay no attention to those if you don't want to. But a lot of times you can glean little bits of information, perhaps find a good way to store dried goods, beans or rice or whatever. You may find something, an idea that you had never thought of. Oh, that's a good way. At the same time, they're talking about hoarding tons of gold and all kinds of stuff for a big economic collapse. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt, but you may find some very interesting tidbits of information and a lot of stories from people who've been there. Hopefully, Greg will have a chance next Thursday, this coming Thursday, when he's back, to talk about some of his deployments. He was deployed to Puerto Rico after the huge storm down there, and was part of the recovery effort. And he saw a lot of things. One of the phrases that we have borrowed from other agencies is improvise, adapt, and overcome. Again, that's part of that state of mind about trying to be a survivor and using the best tool that you were given, which is your brain. And one of the phrases that you will hear us talk about as the class progresses is situational awareness. And situational awareness applies to CERT, for example, in search and rescue of a building that's been damaged by an earthquake. You have to be aware of what's going on around you and making the determination, is it safe for me to go in or is it not? But situational awareness can apply when you're driving your car and you're simply trying to be a little more aware of what's around you, as opposed to kind of putting yourself on autopilot and just going through the motions. And most of the time, that's fine. You don't have a problem. But sometimes we get lulled into this sense of security, and you need to try and expand that, because what happens is the phrase, people will say, well, they have a sixth sense. Well, what that really is you have a conscious mind and a subconscious mind. And your subconscious mind is fairly alert. And when you get that sense that something is wrong, what that is that your subconscious picked up on a sound, a sight, a smell, something through your five senses that it recognized isn't right. It's not, just something's not right. And it's trying to bring that to your conscious mind. And the trick here of developing this situational awareness, this state of mind to be a survivor, is to not ignore that. It sounds fairly simple, but it's a technique that you have to kind of reawaken in yourselves and say, I need to pay attention. If something doesn't feel right, ask yourself, what's wrong? What now, not only is your subconscious telling you, but now you're going to focus your conscious mind and your senses and trying to figure out what's wrong. And even if you can't specifically say, oh gosh, I know what's wrong here, but you still feel that there's something wrong, pay attention and maybe consider leaving that area. Erring on the side of caution is usually a pretty good concept. Okay, so covered all that. So we talked about the history of, and forgive me for looking to the side, I'm looking at hopefully what you have on your screen, which is his CERT book. I talked about the Los Angeles Fire Department and the Mexico earthquake. So there's a lot more detail in here. By all means, read that. I've hit the high points. In here, they're saying they saved 700 lives, but unfortunately lost the lives of 100. I said 800 lives they saved. I guess it depends upon the report that you read. There's probably no real true hard, accurate data there. But that was how CERT came about. So it has become this model of how to be prepared. And depending upon where you live, the hazards are going to be different. We generally don't get big windstorms, hurricanes, and tornadoes. Now, we do have tornadoes, but they tend to be little ones, and they last literally just a very few minutes in single digits. I've never heard of a tornado here lasting more than 2 or 3 minutes, and then they're just gone. They can do a lot of damage in a very, very small area. But again, this is something that the professional responders are going to be able to handle. If you live in the Midwest, like my parents used to, then the tornadoes there are a frightening thing, and they come in and they can tear up entire towns and multiple towns, depending upon the life of the hurricane or the tornado. Hurricanes, if you live in the Gulf states, in Florida and places like that, on the East Coast, that can be a huge thing. If you live near one of the big rivers in the middle of the country, flooding, sometimes seasonal flooding, where you've seen pictures of people who are walking through waist-deep water because things are flooded out, or houses floating downriver, you know. So depending upon where you live, the hazards may be different. And so if you take a CERT class in some of those areas, they're probably not going to focus very much on an earthquake, but they are going to focus a lot more on the specific hazard to the area that they live in. And that's appropriate. So this class tries to cover everything, and we try to teach you everything that's in the book, but hopefully you're going to find one or two skills that you perhaps think are more suited to what you can do. People have different levels of physical limitations. You know, if you're young and strong, you can do a lot more than somebody who's my age and in my shape. So, but you still got your brain, and you may already bring to the table certain skills that we can definitely use. So we try to cover, there's the medical portion of it, there's the fire suppression portion, there's the search and rescue. There's also a chapter on disaster psychology. And then there's also a big section that we tend to not talk about it anywhere near enough, but that's documentation. So there's something in CERT for everybody. There's a task that needs to be done, and somebody is going to have that skill to take care of it. We have a need for radio operators, as an example. It's not a very physically demanding job as a general rule, but it's a very, very critical job, because one of the first things that collapses in an event like this is communications. So, I would strongly recommend that you read this kind of overview of what the CERT is about. They have a section that says when disaster strikes, and they're talking about earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods. But they can also have the man-made technological events, such as explosions, hazardous materials accidents that could be very toxic, for example. We will have, when we start getting into the fire portion, we will also talk about hazmat. Mostly we focus on the potential hazards from chemicals in your own home, rather than delving deeply into the hazmat of transportation and commercial storage facilities like that. We will cover some of that, but we don't have the training or the gear to go and deal with that. So we're not going to get too much into that, but we are going to talk about the type of hazards that you might have in your own home and what you can do to mitigate those so that you're in a better position. They do talk about when disaster strikes, it's going to overwhelm the professional responders, communications, transportation, and utilities. Neighborhoods can be cut off for some time. We do expect a lot of damaged roads and disrupted communication systems, and also the infrastructure. This would be the natural gas lines, the electricity, the water, the city water. All of that's going to be shut off. You're not going to have that available to you for some time. And it could be months before some of these things are beginning to be reinstated for you. So having a way to take care of that, having, as I said before, the food, the water, some sort of improvised shelter. If you own perhaps a travel trailer or a motorhome, that's great. You know, I'm not suggesting that you run out and buy one. If you feel that you want to, by all means, it would be a really great thing. Perhaps a tent. You know, you may have to be camping in your backyard or your front yard, depending. But these individual skills and mutual aid within neighborhoods or at your place of work, for example, goes a long way to the recovery process. And this is, it's twofold here with the CERT program. We have, you're maybe threefold, really. You're prepared preparing in advance so that you're ready. When it happens, you have some skills that you can utilize. And then as you're going through the recovery phase, you've got the ability to hopefully make more friends and build some community, because we didn't get to where we are in our society today by the lone wolf. The lone wolf didn't create any of this. They're going to run off and go hide in their secret hidey hole that has all this stuff, and they're going to be fine by themselves. But the majority of people can't do that. Most people are invested in the status quo, and they don't they don't want their life to get any better. I've never met anybody, nor have I ever heard of anybody who ever said, gosh, I wish my life was worse than it is right now. No matter how rich or poor you are, never heard anybody say, I wish things were worse than they are. Like 2020, that's not a problem. Bring it on. Give me some more of this. I've never heard anybody say that. So building some community with your neighbors, having a block party when the power's out and everybody starts bringing their barbecues, you start bringing the food out that you know is going to spoil pretty quick anyway. You know, you're making sure that everybody has something to drink, everybody's got a little bit of food in their belly, and suddenly you're working together as a team. And that goes a long, long way to make the recovery so much better in the aftermath. That really is a big, that's really the biggest risk. You can actually survive the earthquake pretty well, believe it or not, but it's the aftermath when everything is upside down. So the resiliency that you can build within your neighborhood is a huge thing. And hopefully you will talk to other people that you know, friends, family, neighbors, whatever, about this class once you've taken it. And hopefully you enjoy it enough and see enough value in it that you would tell them and say, hey, I took this class and I recommend you take it too. We won't charge them any more than we're charging you for this class. So this will talk about, the book will talk about the CERT organization, the chain of command. If you watch that video, they will actually show you how to determine who the team leader is in a very calm, logical manner. You do have to inform the city that you have activated after the earthquake. When there isn't a big disaster going on, you have to have the city tell you, we need your help. We want you to show up and start doing things. The earthquake happens, you're not going to get an email from the city. They're going to assume that you will self-activate and start doing the things within your scope of practice. And you assume the responsibility to inform the city at the first available opportunity to let them know when you started and what you did. And that documentation thing comes back into it. Take notes. By all means, take notes. This is a book that I keep in my CERT kit. Get a little closer here for you. It is made by Write in the Rain. The nice thing about this, the name is quite literal. It looks like ordinary paper, but you can write on it even when it's wet. And these people offer a number of products, including a condensed version of your CERT manual that is actually smaller than this. And by comparison, there's my hand. It's even smaller than this one. It's the same kind of paper. It is not affected by water. And it has all of the important parts of the CERT manual for you as a refresher. Because we know that it could be any number of years before you actually have to utilize these skills. And you're going to be sitting there scratching your head going, okay, I remember this guy said something about this, but I don't remember what it is. You got one of these little field operating guides, they call them, for the CERT manual. That can really great resource. And that actually, I think, is what it says on it, is CERT Field Operating Guide. Okay. You watch that video, the CERT in action. They will cover a lot of stuff in just 15 minutes about how the leadership is handled and what it is you do. So rather than me talk about it, I will rely on you to watch that video. It's pretty good. It is 1,000 times better than the one they showed when I took the class in 2008. So if there happens to be firefighters on scene, immediately they're in charge. Do whatever the firefighters tell you. Likely they're going to ask you questions, but more times than not, they're not going to assume command of your CERT group. They might, and that's okay, because now you've got a professional giving you instructions. And that's would be the best case scenario. We are there to help them to become the frontline responders when this earthquake happens, because they have a protocol of different places they have to go to first, where they are likely to find the most casualties and need the help the most. The same would be true with the police department. They all have protocols in place. And so in the neighborhoods, it falls on us to try and go out and do the greatest good for the greatest number, save as many lives as we can. Let's see.
Terry, while you're scanning, interesting question has come up about what the effect that an earthquake would have on wells.
Okay, I'm not a hydrologist, but I would expect that you should consider having available to you some sort of filtration system to get the sediment out, because I suspect most wells will get a lot of dirt down into them. Would be
Okay.
very likely.
And if they have electric pumps, the electricity's
And
like,
if you have an electric pump, of course you would have an electric pump until the earthquake hits, and then you won't have an electric pump. So again, if you are reliant upon a well, I would recommend that you look into a generator that you could, a portable one probably, that you could then employ to run the pump to get the water up out of there. And then they make a lot of, you can find a lot of plans online, very simple, for making a filtration system out of a couple of 5-gallon buckets and a few other things. They're gravity fed, and they will filter out a lot of the dirt and that sort of thing out of there. If you're able to drink the water out of the well now without treating it with anything, chances are you'll be able to drink the water out of the well after filtering it to get all the gunk out of it that might be there, all the particulate matter that might work its way in. The earthquake in and of itself is not likely going to cause some kind of other contamination other than, you know, dirt and gravel and whatever might fall down into it, would be my guess.
Okay.
Not knowing the geology of around the well, I can't say and predict whether the well itself will actually survive the earthquake or not. My instinct tells me it probably would, but you know, that's probably just an intuitive reaction. I don't honestly know. There are probably a lot of people who are far more, well, there definitely are people who are far more qualified to answer that question than me. People who dig wells probably know a lot about that. So you might investigate that if that's a concern for you. Probably a good idea. More knowledge is better than less.
Right.
Okay. So the course objectives, you can read through this. We'll just hit a couple of high points, but taking steps to prepare in advance, very, very important. Learning the tasks that a CERT team member might have to provide in terms of, most importantly, it's a search and rescue, the offering some kind of medical care and transporting a victim where they can be handed off to a higher level of medical care, doctors, nurses, hospitals, that sort of thing. And then knowing something about the disaster psychology of what can happen, because there's a lot of stress, a lot of emotional shock is the phrase I think I want to use. And there is a chapter on that. We'll talk about that. They do talk about in the book, they do talk about terrorism. Now, we typically in Salem don't teach the terrorism section in and of itself. By all means, if you're interested in it, read it. I never have thought that Salem was probably a likely target for terrorists. But some of the guys that carried off the attack in 9/11 trained here in Oregon. So they do know that our state exists. But they trained here because they could do so quietly and they didn't disrupt anything so that nobody would notice they were around. And then they went off and did their terrible work that day. But like I said, I don't really consider us to be a high value target. I don't think we're really at risk for that. However, there is a video that we will show, or we will link for you, that talks about a more likely scenario that could happen, and that is an active shooter scenario where, if you remember, how long has it been now? Gosh, has it been 8 years, maybe even 10 years ago since the, it was right before Christmas up at the shopping center in south end of Portland.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that one, and that was not that far from here. And the police departments from all around responded to that. It was was it Washington Square, is that right?
I think so.
It was
Clackamas Town.
Clackamas. Yeah.
Yeah, it was Clackamas Town Center. Yeah, that's it. And so there is a video that we will give you a link to. It's called Run, Hide, Fight. And it is put on by the city of Houston. Pretty good video. You can watch it. I recommend it, but it's not a requirement. You don't have to. If you find the subject to be disturbing, you're not at all required to watch it by any means. We're not going to test you on it. So basically, where I'm at right now, the topics, they've changed this up. This new manual is different than what we used to do. The disaster preparedness and the introduction and kind of explanation of what the class is going to be about, that's tonight. The Unit 2 is a CERT organization in your current book, and I do recommend that you read that. It's a little dry, and I'm not going to dwell on that too much, but I do recommend you read it because it'll give you an idea of the organization and the mobilization of a CERT team. But there's other things that could probably use your time better in the class than that. So next week, or next week, I'm so used to this being a once a week class, I apologize. So Thursday, we will talk about fire suppression and hazmat. So you probably don't have that in your book available. I don't see it in this new manual, but it's fairly important. We'll talk about fire extinguishers. We'll talk about using them. Lola and I have done a video to demonstrate what it looks like when you're acting as a CERT team member to go in and use a fire extinguisher. You will also see that in the CERT in action video. You will see them demonstrating what that looks like. We will talk more about fire extinguishers. We will talk about hazmat, specifically in your home. So we'll cover that. It's like I said, I don't find it in this new book, and I think it's important. I think it's something that you should know about. So we'll cover that. The third class, we will talk about disaster medical operations, part 1, and then the second section of that, chapter 4, is the second half of that, and we will talk about that. And we've also done videos that will provide you a link that show you the bandaging techniques. I wish I could say they were super professional. They're not. I'm a real analog guy, and I'm still fairly new to this video conferencing. But we took. Forgive me, I'm old. Lola and I got together here in the training center, and Greg videoed us doing this, demonstrating some of these techniques. So we will make those available to you as we go along. You're free to review them at any time. Watch these classes over again if you like. And by all means, please, if you have any questions, particularly in between the classes, send the email to Lola, and she will get them to me, and I will answer those questions at the beginning of every class, and I'm happy to do that. After the medical second portion, then we have the disaster psychology. We'll talk about that some. Oh, look, there's fire. Fire safety and utility controls. Okay, good. So we do have that. We'll cover that, I guess. I said we're going to do this in order. So we will cover that not Thursday, but on the 6th class, roughly. We're going to follow them in order. We may start getting into some of these things more than one topic in the same evening, because I find that once we start getting into the book in this video format, the class tends to go by a lot faster. And the light search and rescue. So the last two chapters, chapters 8 and 9, other than recommending, if you choose to watch that run, hide, fight video, that'll be it. Once we get to the end of the search and rescue portion, we're pretty much done with the class, because the rest of this stuff, like the final exam and disaster simulation, well, there is no test that we do, but we use, when we're doing this class live, we have a mock disaster, and you suit up and rescue people and treat them for their injuries and that sort of thing. But we can't do that right now because this is the pandemic edition of this. So those are the order that we're going to do this. So probably next week, I may touch very lightly on the CERT organization, and then probably start moving into the medical one on Thursday, because except what's in the CERT organization is important, but it's not a topic that I'm going to dwell on very much, because I don't think it's the best use of our time here under these circumstances. You can read about it and you'll pick it up. It's pretty straightforward. So what I wanted to talk about as well tonight is, we talked about the fact that communications always fall apart. So there's some things that you can do, you can be prepared for in advance. And if you'll forgive me for a moment, I'm going to step away from the camera, and I'll be right back and show you a few things. Okay, so cell towers require electricity to function. They do generally have battery backup, but it will only last a few hours and the battery will go dead. And then the cell tower isn't repeating your signal. The other thing is that even if it has power, if it's more than 3 degrees out of alignment with the next tower, because these are microwave transmissions, it will not make a proper connection. So cell phones will either be non-functional at all, or at best, you might be able to send a text message, because those are sent as a burst message. They don't take very much time, and they have a higher likelihood of getting through rather than a voice communication. So if you have a landline, they're probably not going to be functioning at all. The phone company does still provide the power for those, but their power generation is probably going to be offline. The lines can be disrupted. A lot of them are still running overhead, and the poles can come down, all sorts of problems with that. So how are you going to be able to communicate? Well, there's two different aspects about that. One of them is you want to get information. The other one is you want to send information. And that's can be two separate functions, or it can be done at the same time, depending. A few things in here. One of the things that you ought to consider having is some sort of portable radio like this that can pick up AM and FM bands, and also most of these will also handle the weather band. Okay, on a day-to-day basis, if you tune into the weather band, it's an extremely boring voice repeating the weather forecast over and over and over again for the area that it serves. So in this case, you might be, it's like listening to it from Lincoln City all the way, you know, over to Staten or something, and then they'll start all over again. And it'll just repeat the message, and they'll update it periodically so that as the information changes, the forecast stays.
I'm sorry, I
what do I say?
still can't see you. So what kind of radio did you just hold up?
Okay. This is a small it can be handheld. It's about, I don't know, 8 or 10 inches long, radio that has the AM band, the FM band, and it also has a weather radio in it. It
Okay.
has ability to run off of batteries. Also, a lot of these will have a power cord so that when you have, you know, power from your wall, you can plug them in. But it also, this particular one also has a solar panel on top so that you can run it off of when the sun's shining. It has an extendable antenna, a telescoping antenna, so that you can pick up the signal. And then this particular one also has a crank on the side so that you can wind up a little dynamo in it and use that to power the radio if you any other way. Okay, there's a number of these out there, you know. So the reason that I say these are important, and it's mostly the AM band rather than the FM band, because some of the most powerful radio stations that are out there are AM radio. The biggest radio station in Oregon that I'm aware of anyway is 1190 KEX out of Portland. It's a high watt broadcasting radio station during the day. They tune it down at night a little bit, but you can usually pick up KEX almost anywhere in the valley. And at night, it can be, I have received radio reception from KEX as far south as, well, I was south of San Francisco, and I could pick it up before the sun. Yeah, the wave can carry a long ways. So the important takeaway from that is, because KEX is in the strike zone for the earthquake, so they may or may not be able to transmit. But it has a sister station, it's owned by the same company out of San Francisco, and that's KGO. And you can bet that a radio station like KGO will broadcast important information. Here locally in town, assuming that they're able to broadcast, will be 1490 KBZY and 1430 KYKN. Those two stations would probably be disseminating information. But along with that is these weather bands. The weather band frequencies are part of the emergency alert system, which they used to call the emergency broadcast system. They utilize those for the Amber Alert, for example. If you had a radio that was on a weather channel frequency and they released an Amber Alert, you would hear that over that weather channel band. And they will utilize that for disseminating important and critical information that we all will need to know over those frequencies as well. So having a radio that has the ability to pick up weather band is really a good idea, and they're piggybacking that onto all sorts of small radios like this one that unfortunately one of you can't see. But there's a lot of them out there. So and especially having something that has that crank on it, and a lot of them will have the ability to actually charge your cell phone as a possibility. Now you're going to be spending some time cranking on it, but nonetheless, that's not a bad thing. Doesn't have to be a brand new one. This one is larger, and this is an old Midland transistor AM radio from the 1960s, and it still works. It has it also has an extendable antenna that happens to be bigger. It's a longer antenna than the one that this other radio has. It's a little older, it's a little more staticky, probably because it's got some dust down inside of it, but it still works, and that's fine. If you have a radio already, you don't have to run out and buy a new one, okay? But having a way to receive those bands is a really good idea. So you can get information that's critical, where they're going to be distributing water, where the professionals are setting up a field hospital if you need to if you yourself or a member of your family or somebody you know or just a victim that you found needs to be taken there, they'll tell you where it is. That sort of radio communication is really important. If you are working in a CERT team and you want to be talking to each other in the team over the distance of 2 or 3 city blocks, perhaps, there's another type of radio. This one is a Midland handheld two-way radio that's the size of a large cell phone, I suppose, an older style cell phone. They operate on a half a watt. They have they're pretty severely limited in terms of their distance, but they'll go 2-3 blocks. Under ideal conditions, they'll go maybe a mile or so. Under ideal conditions, line of sight, nothing's blocking you. It's a handheld radio. You can buy them. They operate on what's called the FRS, which stands for Family Radio Service Band. As I say, they're a half a watt, or sometimes listed as a 500 milliwatt short range radio. And this is what we typically recommend the CERT team members use to communicate with each other. They're fairly lightweight, they're rechargeable. They will also function on AAA batteries if you get the right ones. So I would say, read the features before you buy. Typically, these things can run anywhere from probably $60 to $80 for a pair for Midland. There's also Cobra, but there's other brands of radios out there as well, and sometimes you'll see them offered, in a 4 or 5 pack. Sometimes they're cheaper than this. Sometimes you get what you pay for. So read up on them and do a little research on that. But all radios, regardless of who makes them, that operate on the Family Radio Service Band will talk to each other. I recommend, and I know that some other people who teach this class, Paul Guthrie, whose name has popped up on the screen here, I know he's listening. We are in agreement that the simpler the radio is, the better off you are. You don't need all of the whiz-bang options that they might offer you. And I would also recommend that you keep the instructions with the radio at all times, because you're probably not going to use this thing very often. And when the time finally comes that you need to use it, you're going to look at it and go, gosh, how do I get this to function? One of the things that I like about this particular radio that I chose, the Midland radio, is they call it a Midland GXT. It has a real simple knob on top next to the antenna. This is the on-off volume knob. So you don't have to try and remember what button do I have to push or hold or do whatever in order to make it turn on. You just turn the knob, assuming the battery has a charge, which this one doesn't right now. It will come on and it will tell you what channel it's on. And then you can adjust the instructions will tell you how to adjust the frequency to the one that your team decides they're going to use. And now you have the ability to communicate with each other for a short distance. So elevation is everything, especially with one of these low power radios. So if you have the ability to get to a higher elevation and there's no trees or buildings in the way, you can extend the range of these radios. I have used them while traveling with another couple in 2 separate vehicles. So we're line of sight easily a half a mile on the freeway, no problem. Crystal clear communications. I wanted to test them out and see how well they worked, and they worked great. We had absolutely no problems with them. And they're a little faster than trying to dial up somebody's phone number and call them on the cell phone and wait for them to ring and then they answer it. You just key the mic and talk to them and they respond right away. So they work pretty well, and they're reasonably rugged. So it's something that you can look into if you think that might be an area that interests you. So then the last bit on the communications is, and there's a number of people in the CERT program who have become an amateur radio operator. It does require a license, whereas those FRS radios do not. Amateur radio license required, or amateur radio operation requires a license. You have to take a test. You have to pass it. And then you're able to utilize the radio, because by that time you'll understand some of the protocols and what's the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do, so you don't do that. But you can communicate over a much longer distance with the radio, depending upon the radio that you choose. The days of having to learn and memorize Morse code and operate it at a certain number of words per minute are gone. It's no longer necessary to do that. You get your license, your technician's license, and you can just voice communication is fine. Also, it used to be many years ago that you had to be able to build a radio from a box full of components, and in order to pass, the radio had to work. Well, that's no longer a requirement either, because you can buy these radios everywhere practically. They're importing them from China, and also Japan has been making some very high quality radios for a long time. You can spend a little bit of money, you can spend a lot, depending upon how deep into this hobby you want to get. Personally, I don't actually use my ham license as a hobby. I virtually never turn it on, except once a month when I'm available we do a CERT test to test our equipment and see how far we can communicate, and do we have to relay a message. And we do this more with the lower powered stuff, and we don't use a frequency that is attached to a repeater, which is on a hilltop somewhere around 2,000-foot elevation, that can repeat. You can easily talk to people in Portland with a handheld 5-watt radio if you're on the repeater frequency, but those may not be available to us in the event of the earthquake, so we're going to be using either more high-powered radios or these handheld units in a somewhat shorter distance. But you can reach a few miles quite easily with a handheld radio. And if you have a more powerful radio, you can reach many tens of miles quite easily on what's called a simplex frequency, where you and the other person is talking on the same channel. So the thing about ham radio is that the people who are involved with it, particularly the people who've been with it for a very long time, it has a special place in disaster recovery. It is not unfair at all to say that amateur radio or ham radio is the last line of communication defense in the United States. It is there specifically in an emergency to service emergency responders, and in worst case scenario, even act as a communication form for the military if necessary. Now, ordinarily they've got their own gear, and it's far more high tech than what most amateur radio operators have. But things are really changing, and there's a lot of options and availability that ham radio can now do. One of the things is someone has come up with some very interesting software such that you can have a laptop computer that you can link to your ham radio, and you can send an email over the radio waves to another computer somewhere else that is also linked in with that program, and they can receive it and download it, and they can read your email. And they're also working where they can actually send video over the ham radio waves as well. Very specific sort of thing, but it is working. There will probably always be improvements as time goes on, but they're increasing the ability of amateur radio. And there are certain frequencies set aside for that sort of thing. So you become a ham radio operator on voice communication, you won't be interfering with that. But if that's something that interests you, by all means, you can investigate that. There are groups that put on classes here in Salem to make it easier for you to pass the test. So one of my radios that I have, I keep just off camera here, I have a box that I keep all of my radio gear in. So that's always together, and it's got the books and the manuals and all that kind of stuff in case they forget something. This radio is about the same size as an older flip phone. It's about the same size as those Motorola flip phones they used to have in the 90s, late 90s and early 2000s. And this is an amateur radio. This is a ham radio right here. It has an antenna, not very big, on top of it, and it has a keypad on the front, and it is capable of operating on a couple of different frequency ranges. And I've used it a number of times in the test. It has limitations, but it does work. And this radio is Chinese built, and it was about $130. There are other higher quality ones that you can buy that you would spend more money, but you're not glued to a box that sits on a table that's, you know, the size of an old television set or something like that, like it used to be. They're now quite compact. They have mobile units that you can put in your vehicle that are about the size of a CB radio, give or take, that people used to have in the 70s and 80s all the time. Those can run, depending upon the radio. This is this handheld unit that I have here is a 5-watt radio, which is what, 10 times the power of that FRS radio, and they're the same size. Different frequencies, but it's 10 times the power of that. Well, a mobile radio, you can get them to where they'll run anywhere from 10 watts up to 80 or even 100 watts. Most of them, the common ones, run 50 watts, which is again 10 times more powerful than this handheld unit. So the higher the wattage, the better they're going to reach. And also, that's also a function of the antenna. The bigger the antenna, relatively speaking, is going to increase your range quite a lot. So this will give you the opportunity, these ham radios, to reach out and talk to people over a farther range. Or the other option is, if you don't have one or you don't choose to pursue that, you can find somebody who is an amateur radio operator. So the earthquake happens, we have no real way to communicate outside of the area, and you have family members that are concerned about you, and you can't talk to them, and they're outside the area. They're living in Colorado, say. Well, you can find a ham radio operator, and you can give him a message and who it is you're going to contact and what their phone number is. And he will, as time permits, he will transmit that radio, he or she will transmit that message via radio to the next available radio operator, who will then copy that message down and turn around and transmit it again to the next available radio operator that can receive it. And they will keep leapfrogging that message until they get to somebody who's completely outside of the affected area that has a telephone that can use it. And then they will call that family member and give them the message, and they will say, I am amateur radio operator KF7HZZ, and I am in receipt of a relayed message for you. The message is as follows. They will repeat the message, and then they will ask if there is any return message. And if there is, they'll copy it down and they'll send it back down the chain. And you can come back a couple days later, maybe whatever it takes, and they will say, yep, the message got through and we got an answer from your relative and they received the message. So they practice this. The Amateur Radio Relay League does this, and every year, and it starts in, I believe, New Jersey, and they bounce it all the way to the West Coast and back, and they go through as many radio operators as they can. They like, the more the merrier. They like to do that, and each one repeats the message to the next person, and then that person passes it on to the next person. It can go through hundreds of people before the message gets back. And then what they do is they compare the original message that they sent, and they have in writing, to the return message that they got back, and they're supposed to be the same. And as it turns out, it always is exactly, with no errors. They're that good. They care about it that much. So even if you don't get into ham radio yourself, if that doesn't interest you, knowing that you can find somebody who is, and look for the guy with the big antenna at his house, they will relay that message for you usually. So that's going to be the radio is going to be the backup way to communicate. Getting information with an AM, FM battery powered radio, or the one in your car, you know, as long as you've got power in the battery and fuel in the tank to charge the battery, you can go check periodically. AM stations, and they will be providing you information if they have the ability to transmit. So they'll find ways to get that information to you. And then knowing that the weather band channels, and if they have it, it says right on the front of the radio, it'll say weather band, or it'll say NOAA, NOAA, which is the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, which is part of the National Weather Service, or the other way around. They administer the weather channels, and they will definitely transmit vital information over those frequencies. So if you have a radio that can receive that, that's another good way to get that. So, anybody
Terry,
have any questions immediately? Yeah.
Paul made a comment. Paul is our amateur radio pro here. He made a comment that the amateur radio system that relays health and welfare messages is the National Traffic System, NTS.
Okay,
And thank you, Paul.
that would be, yeah. So yeah, there's quite a network of very experienced and very dedicated amateur radio operators. They take it real seriously. They police themselves. Amateur radio doesn't have any time for foul language or not following protocols. Somebody will call you out on it usually if you forget to do something right. So definitely a critical resource in the United States for communications, and the world for that matter. And if it's something that you decide it interests you, I mean, there are guys who routinely talk to people in other parts of the world. As far away as possible is usually their goal. So it can be an interesting hobby if that interests you, or it can be a very useful tool in either event. It's very, very important. So, anything else? Any other questions? Okay, well, I'm going to wrap it up for tonight then, because we've pretty well gone through the introduction stuff. And starting on Thursday, then I'll talk a little bit about the CERT organization probably, and then I'll start getting into disaster medical operations. And we'll talk about that. So if there's nothing else, I will, somebody's waving their hand in the ceiling there. I don't know if that's trying to get my attention or not, but if not, then we'll call it for tonight.
Yeah, I'll send out the links for the information that we talked about tonight too, other than the ones that you've already received.
Okay. I think we're done. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Have a good
Yeah,
evening.
thank you.
Okay.